"Behold, the Argonath, the pillars of the kings," cried Aragorn. "We shall pass them soon. Keep the boats in line and fall as far apart as you can. Hold the middle of the stream." As Frodo was borne towards them, the great pillars rose like towers to meet him. Giants they seemed to him, like vast grey figures, silent but threatening. Then he saw that they were indeed shaped and fashioned. The craft and power of old had wrought upon them, and they still preserved through the suns and rains of forgotten years the mighty likenesses in which they had been hewn. Upon great pedestals, founded in the deep waters, stood two great kings of stone. Still with blurred eyes and crannied brows, they frowned upon the north. The left hand of each was raised palm outwards in gesture of warning. In each right hand there was an axe. Upon each head there was a crumbling helm and crown. Great power and majesty they still wore, the silent wardens of the long-vanished kingdom. Even Boromir bowed his head as the boats whirled by, frail and fleeting as little leaves under the enduring shadow of the sentinels of Númenor. So they passed into the dark chasm of the gates. "Fear not," said a strange voice behind him. Frodo turned and saw Strider, and yet not Strider, for the weather-worn ranger was no longer there. In the stern sat Aragorn, son of Arathorn, proud and erect, guiding the boat with skillful strokes. His hood was cast back, and his dark hair was blowing in the wind. A light was in his eyes, a king returning to exile to his own land. Hello, it's William. I'm back. Hopefully that set up a mood. That's the scene in The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, where they pass through the Argonath. So that's what we're going to end up creating. It might take a few streams. I'm not sure how many. We'll see. But we're going to start with basics. And today's basics with Blender. And so if you just joining into the stream and my stuff, we're going to be doing a whole tutorial series on how to use Blender. And Blender is a open source 3D modeling system. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, or if you don't have it, just check on blender.org and download the latest version. So that should be Blender 2.83.1. It should work on anything Linux, Windows, Mac. And make sure that you do get the latest version. If you're using like one of the older ones, pre 2.8, some of the things I show you might not be the same. So, yeah. But yeah, we're gonna be recreating bits from Lord of the Rings. Do you need the latest versions? As I said, yeah, it would be good because like keyboard shortcuts and things will be changing and stuff like that. You don't need to get like experimental versions, just get the stable version. I'm not going to attain that comment with a response. Yeah, 2.8 is fine. Anything 2.8 and above. So, hopefully the Windows work and stuff, because I've got it set up for streaming like this. There might be pop-ups that won't show up. If I'm seeing something I'm describing something that you're not seeing popping up on the screen, maybe just shout in the comments, because it might be like the windows and stuff. I can switch to my other overlay, but then you get all this stuff covering the screen. So I prefer to stay in this view. Hello, welcome. Okay, So I'll give you all a moment to download that, but basically when you start up Blender, you should get a screen that looks something similar to this. Basically, you're going to have a cube and stuff like this. It's all gray. Yes, I know. I very much am a Lord of the Ring geek. So basically, whenever you hear these tutorials for Blender, they always start off, delete the cube. We're not going to do that. We're going to work with this today. So that passage I described to you from the Lord of the Rings, we have the two massive statues, but we're not going to work on those today. We're going to just keep it simple, and we're going to start with the two axes. So we're going to do one axe and go with basics of how to use Blender, really. Okay, so you can select things by left-clicking on them. In the older versions of Blender, this was a right-click select, so that's why I'm saying you want to be on the latest version. I'm going to go like super basics with this, so if it makes sense to you, hold out for other people, because I just want to explain things in depth. And what we're going to do is, as things go along, if you get stuck with something, we have a Discord channel, Discord server. So if you go to this link, I'm going to put it in the chat as well. There is the Discord server, and there's a Basics with Blender channel in there, and you can post images, stuff like that. I'll answer your questions in chat. I won't be able to like read chat and Discord, but I'll come every now and look for pictures and stuff. So let me know in Twitch chat if you've posted something there that you want to look at. Yeah, so let's get in. So every object in Blender will appear in the top right. I think my face is sitting there, so if I just switch the view, you should be able to see it now. So this top right place here is basically where all the different objects are. So if I click on camera, it selects the camera. If I click on cube, it selects the cube. Click on light, it shows the light. So these are the objects that by default come in with Blender. But we're not going to spend a lot of time in that top right section. We're going to just work with the cube. So you can select an object like that. You'll see that you get these arrows next to them. If I use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, we can get closer. And if I hold in the middle mouse button, I can rotate around the screen. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, or if you've got like a Mac mouse with 1 button or something like that, I don't know if those still exist, but if you look in the settings, there should be, under Edit Preferences, there are settings that you can change for there's emulate 3-button mouse. So that will change the controls, and you'll see that it will do Alt left mouse for any sort of combination of things. So instead of middle mouse, you'll do Alt mouse click. Yeah. Just thought I should know if that, let you know if that's confusing you if you don't have one of those mice. Okay, so if I hold down Shift, and there should be a overlay with the keys that I'm using on the left-hand side, somewhere over here. So if I hold down the Shift key and the middle mouse button, then you pan around the scene. So this way, when you combine Shift middle mouse rotate, you can basically get anywhere in the scene. And you'll see that I do this a lot just to figure out how things are looking. Okay, so you'll notice that in the background there are these grids, and they have different colors. And when I select the object, it also has those colors on the little arrows in the middle. So basically those relate to the rotations of the X, Y, and Z. So if you look in the right over here, I'm not sure, is that covered by my camera? I don't think so. It should be right next to my camera. So you'll see there that those colors, and then when I rotate the camera, these rotate as well. So that's basically telling you that blue is the Z or the Z, whichever way you say it. So that's basically upwards, X for horizontal in the one direction, and Y for horizontal in the other direction. So this way you can just get an idea of which way things are facing, and you can just quickly look at this to see if you're looking up or something funny like that. So if I now click and use the mouse over one of these arrows, if I use, say, the red one, I can drag the objects in the X direction. Same with the Y, with the blue, and Z with the, with the blue and not the green with the other one. Sorry. Okay, so that's like basic object movement. But a lot of the time, finding and clicking on these arrows can be like annoying, and you've got to like move your mouse to get it nice and like grab it. So the easier method is to just click on the object you want to move, and if you press the G key, think of it like grab, then you can pick up and move the object just like that. And then if you want to constrain it so that it only moves on what we talked about, the X, Y, and Z, you can just press X, Y, or Z on your keyboard. And then it's basically like just dragging on one of those arrows. So that's G and then X, Y, and Z for whichever one of these things you want to move. So that's also nice if you want to just quickly, you just want to move it up, you can just grab and Z, and then you're not going to move it sideways accidentally or something. Because if you just press G, it moves just where you are on the screen, which can also be useful depending on what you want to do. I hope that makes sense. So that's like basic interaction with an object. So in 3D, we've got like the basic positions which are in the X, Y, and Z. But every object, since it's a combination of various mathematical things, will have more than just X, Y, and Z position. It will also have scale and rotation. So if you press the N key, you get this menu pops up on the right-hand side, which gives you a lot of options, but the one we're going to look at is the transform. So you'll see if I do the grab, press the G to transform the object, you'll see that these numbers are all changing. If I do grab and go on X, you'll see that just the X numbers are changing over there. And you can also click on those numbers and change them manually if you want. Or you can type in a position. You can say move it 10 meters on the X or whatever. And you'll see that the grid in the background of Blender by default is set to meters. So if you move 1 meter, it will move it 1 meter across. If you move it -1 meter, it moves 1 meter in the other direction. If you are someone who prefers to use other units, if you go into, I think it's the scene properties, so you see that there's a little icon with triangle, circle sort of thing over here. There is a little thing here for units, and you can switch from metric to imperial or mess it up and change it to whatever you want. You can multiply it by another number if you want. I'm going to leave it on meters because that's correct. Fight me. metric all the way. Okay, so if for you it makes more sense to use those, there you go, but we're going to use meters. So now you can get an idea when you zoom in and out. These small grid lines are meters, but if you zoom out even further, you see even thicker lines, so that's every 10 meters. And if you zoom out even more, you get 100 meters. But in general, you're probably going to be working on like a meter scale. Or if you want to work on like a scene where things are ultra tiny, you can scale it down. But you don't need to worry about units and stuff. We're doing basics with art. We're not doing technical drawings, so don't worry about it. Okay. So the next step, you see that there's rotation. So I'm going to teach you the keyboard shortcuts because they make life easier. So if you remember G for grabbing, think of R for rotating. So if I press R, now it will do the same sort of thing. It will rotate around the view. And you can also do the same thing of pressing X to rotate along the X, Y to rotate along the Y, and Z to rotate along the Z. I said both Z and Z. So you'll see that when you rotate along each of those axes, it rotates along the line for that. So like the Z goes up, or Z goes up. When I press R and go Z, it's rotating along the line that goes up. So if you can see your colors over here and you want to make sure that it's rotating along the green one, just remember that green is the Y. So if you say RY, it rotates along the green. There's also, if you press R and then R again, so R, Y, when it's rotating, you can press R a second time, then it just changes the way it rotates. So instead of rotating along the view, it rotates along the center of the object, which can be nice. Ooh, I'll have to check out that because I did try some different things, but the only other option I had was if you press a key multiple times, and it was just like spamming it across the screen. So I'll double check that in the future or see if I can make things stay up or something. I'm not sure. So at the moment, I'm not actually holding in any keys. So I'm usually just pressing a key and releasing. So I'm not holding in R when I do this. It just stays stuck on that. Yeah, so that should make sense. And then you'll see that there's one more setting over here, which is scale. So if we go along with the same things that I was saying before, if I press the S key, then you scale the object. So that's just making it bigger or smaller. And again, like all these things, if you just want to scale along the X, you can just press X while you're doing this, and it will scale along like that. Oh, and by the way, I'm not sure if I said, if you want to stop doing these things, just right click. I think I forgot to say that. So if you press scale, and then if you left click, it will apply it. I'm just pressing Ctrl Z to undo that. And then if you scale and press, and you don't like what you're doing, you can just right click and it will cancel what you were doing. So some of these things become second nature, and I don't think of them as I'm doing it. So call me out if I'm doing something and not explaining it. Okay, so we've got a basic cube over here. It's not particularly interesting, but to like explain more of how 3D stuff works, we're going to switch into edit mode. You'll see if we look in the top left here, it says we're in object mode. So object mode is where you can select all the different objects in the scene and move them around and stuff like that. Edit mode is where you start changing the shape of an individual object. And if you want me to slow down at any point, let me know, because I might be speaking a bit fast. So to go into edit mode, you just want to have your cube or whatever you want to edit selected. And then you can either click in this drop down and go to edit mode. You'll see there are a bunch of other ones. We're just going to work with edit mode. So you can click on that. And then you'll see that things sort of go orange and you see like different lines and dots over here. So those are the vertices, and faces that make up this object. The other way that you can switch to edit mode is to just select your object, and if you press the tab key, it toggles between object and edit mode. So it makes life a lot easier when you just select your object, press tab, instead of select your object, move your mouse, find edit mode. Okay, so you'll see when I zoom in over here, we've got this little orange dot. So I'm just left clicking on that, and you'll see that all the other things deselected. I've just got this little dot selected. So that's one vertex of this object. Hi, Luke. Don't worry, you didn't miss much. We're just getting into ultra basics. So just like the object itself, you can move individual vertices. So if I press the G key, the grab, you'll see that this moves this one vertex around. And you can do the same stuff with moving just along the X, just along the Y, or just along the Z. So you see that when I move that one vertex around, you get like the whole shape has changed. That's because the shape is created out of faces, which are basically joining together of each of these vertices. So this face of the object is basically connecting these four vertices on the side. So and if it's not making sense now, like why can't you select that? It's because this is in vertex select mode. So you see in the top here, next to edit mode, it's saying vertex select. If yours isn't showing it's on vertex and you've got other stuff, you might have used Blender before. But vertex select allows you to select just vertices. Then there's next to that, there's edge select. So when you create a face or something, it's creating a line between 2 points. So you're saying create an edge between this vertex and that vertex. So if I left click here, it's basically selecting that line. So that's an edge. So if I grab that, if I rotate that, scale that, basically it's changing the points of that vertex, but you're just working with the one line. And a face, if I go into face select mode, is basically joined together versions of edges. So if I left click on this one, you'll see it gets selected in orange, and that's a face. So if I grab that, it's this whole side of the cube, which is no longer a cube. And you can rotate and scale and all that sort of stuff with that. So basically in 3D, things are usually either triangles, polygons, and that just basically means it's using 3 vertices or more than 3 vertices. So if you ever hear that in a tutorial or something, that's what it means. Triangles is just a mesh that's split up to only include faces that have 3 points. We're not going to go into any more detail on why you would use other stuff yet. We're just going to stay on the basics. Okay, but that's not particularly interesting with just a cube that you can drag around bits. So let's make it a little bit more interesting. So Luke, you just joined in. What we're going to do is we're going to make an axe, because we're going to create a statue from the Argonath, from the Lord of the Rings, those giant statues of the kings on the river, and each of them carry axes. So I thought that would be a nice place to start, just a fairly simple object. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. So you want to go into edit mode. So you select your object, your cube, and you go into tab, and then you'll see at the top here, I think there are keyboard shortcuts for this, but I change it so infrequently that I still just use these. If you are unsure about keyboard shortcuts at any time, if you go into edit at the top, preferences, and key map, and you can search for whatever you want. So you can be like vertex, stuff like that. Yeah, I was actually gonna there is a link I wanted to send you. I had another one similar to that. This is from a guy called what's his name? Andrew Price. It's a Blender cheat sheet with a bunch of different keyboard shortcuts. And I'm going to put that in the chat for you. But usually I'm just going to tell you if we're going to use a keyboard shortcut, what it is. But if you want to like mess around with these things in your own time after stream, you can figure them out. But yeah, I think Googling stuff is one of the best ways to learn as well. But the best way is to do by practice. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, so to turn this into an axe, the simplest way is to select the top face. And we're just going to... Let me Google that for you. And if you press the G key, so, whoops, I pressed F. If you press the G key, we want to move it up to create a tall axe. So if we want to go up and go along the Z, we'll stretch this up. And you'll see that we're going up by like 30 meters or whatever, but we don't have to worry about size. You must have pressed something funny, Luke. I'm trying to think of what you would have done to do that. Your face is detached. What did you do? You might have pressed like E or something accidentally. Because there are keyboard shortcuts that will detach faces. So you can just Control Z and undo your stuff to get it and try grabbing it again. You might have duplicated it or something instead. So I'm just going to drag that up, and then we've got like a long rectangle. Let me know if you still encounter trouble. Out of the camera view. Oh, were you in the camera? Did you somehow get to camera? Okay, so if you press keys on the numpad, if you press the zero key on the numpad, the camera switches to the camera itself. And then if you press the middle mouse, you'll switch back to the rotation thing by yourself. But this is a useful time for telling you these other things. So the numpad keys, so the pad of keys on the right-hand side of your keyboard. If you don't have those and you don't know what the hell I'm talking about, I'll explain another method just now. If you press 1, it'll go to a side view looking down the y-axis. If you press 3, it'll go to the x-axis. If you press 7 and 8, you'll switch between the top and the bottom, so looking down the Z. And pressing 5 switches you between perspective view and orthographic view. So orthographic view just turns off perspective, basically. So if you're getting confused with lines stretching all over the place. Yeah, so pressing X, Y, and Z whenever you're doing something will clamp it to just going along the X, Y, or Z. So if I press grab and Z, it just moves along the Z axis. So the Z axis, since you joined a little bit later, is identified by these colors over here. So you'll see Z is blue, and that's the line that goes upwards. X is red and goes horizontally in the one direction, and Y is green and goes the other way. So whenever you're grabbing something, you can just look at those things and try find your way around like that. Okay, so we have hopefully all got long cubes now, rectangles. And now the interesting stuff starts happening. So if I press the E key, so E, what it's doing is extruding. So basically it's saying, I want to take the face that I have selected and I want to pull it out. So that'll just stretch out a section, and it usually by default will go from the direction that it was facing. So if I do the same for like selecting another one of these and press E, you'll see it stretches it out in the direction of that one facing. Yeah, keyboard shortcuts are everywhere in Blender. I think I was looking the other day and there are like 2,500 combinations of keyboard shortcuts. Don't worry, I don't know them all. Barely know half the ones that I'm telling you right now. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly undo, go back, and E and show you again. So we get that stretched out, and you'll see that it creates the edges that were there are still there. So what I originally had, but it's creating new geometry from that. Zoom somewhere other than the origin. If you holding the shift key while you're pressing the middle mouse button, it'll grab it around and then you're zooming around that point. There are settings, I think, for switching to how it rotates around. But so if you go to preferences under navigation, there's orbit method, tone table, trackball, orbit around selection, stuff like that. So you can mess around with those for what works for you. I'm just staying in the default stuff for now. So you can have it so that it'll always rotate around the selected object, but I'm just used to moving around like this. So you will have seen when I did that second extrude, we're already starting to get something that starts to look like an axe. It's not really an axe, but you get the picture of how you start creating geometry. So extrude will push an object out, push a face out. You can also do it with multiple faces if you want. Ah, come on, we're going to do so much more. But we're just working with the one for now. And if you're struggling with keyboard shortcuts, if I pop up, I think on the left-hand side here, you probably already have these over here. Mine was just hidden, but you'll see that you get a whole lot of different tools available in edit mode. And these all depend. So if I'm in object mode, you'll have different tools available. So basically the extrude and stuff are all available here. You'll see extrude is there. So if I do that, click on a face and say extrude region, it'll just give you hand draggers to work on instead of doing it manually. I mean, we are building a at least 100 meter tall statue, so a 30 meter tall axe kind of makes sense. Okay, so extrude will push out an object, and then there is another thing called inset. So if I press I, so you'll notice most of these keyboard shortcuts relate to the name of the thing. So extrude E, inset I. Inset is basically like saying extrude and shrink at the same time, where it's basically just creating a smaller version of the face that you have selected. So if I do that, we can create a smaller region over here, and if we extrude that, we get it to look more like this is a blade coming through a shaft of a blade or something like that, shaft of a axe. So you can start making it look more like an axe by scaling it. So if I go scale and go for the Z, so I just want to scale it along the vertical, it scales up. Okay, so let me just, so I just want to, so insetting is basically very similar to extruding, but it doesn't move it out, it just moves it inwards. So if I press I, you'll see that it shrinks down this face. And then if I press E on that, we can extrude that outwards. So this way we're just separating it into two separate things. Okay, so from this I'm just going to scale it with the Z-axis. I can also just scale it down as well, because this is a very hefty, thick axe. If I go to press 7 and look at it straight from the top, it's thick with 4 C's. So if I just scale this without pressing anything, pressing S to scale will shrink that down, and we start getting a thinner axe blade over there. But you'll see if you do that without constraining it, it also shrinks it along the Z. So we can just press scale and go to Z and make it thicker again. So we can repeat this, extrude it again, scale it, make it thinner, so we can make sure that we don't get this funny shrinking and just go along the, I think it would be the Y. So if we just shrink it along the Y, you start getting a nice sharper axe blade. And then if we scale it along Z, make it taller again. Okay, so if you just check if you're in object mode or edit mode. So this is at the top left hand side of the screen. Oh, is it 1, 2, 3? Well, that's fairly simple. The reason why I haven't been showing that is because I was going to explain for people who don't have numpad keys, there's a setting to use those for rotations. But yeah, I see what you mean. 1, 2, 3 will switch between. Yeah, that doesn't help. What would be useful is, I think, I'm not sure if all browsers support it, but I think it might just be a Firefox thing. If you're on Firefox, there's a picture-in-picture thing, so you can pop out a window of the stream and just have that on your screen, and it'll stay on top while you're doing other stuff. Scale then Z, yeah. So you see now we've got a weird ass looking axe. But most axes are not this sort of squared off edge. They've got this a nice sort of rounded edge to it. I'm pressing numpad 1 to switch to side view. Most axes have a nice rounded edge. So to make it smoother, there are tons of different ways to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say Control R. So that's the control key and the R. And you'll see that when I move my mouse around, you get these sort of yellow lines that appear in places. Basically, that's showing you where it's going to do this. And what this is going to do is going to add a edge loop. So I'm just going to press right click to cancel. So basically, an edge loop is just a surrounding thing of edges. So like when we extruded these faces, we've got these edges over here creating a loop around the whole object. So what I did to select that whole loop was I pressed the Alt key and just clicked on an edge, and basically it selects what Blender considers an edge loop. So it's basically an unrestricted connection of things. So if you connect dots from one to another in one direction, that's a loop. So you'll see if I do that over here, it stops over here because it's kind of not sure which way to go because it's broken up by this inset that I did. But like over here, that does a loop around here, and this one will do a loop around this point. Don't worry if that doesn't make any sense. All we need to do is press Ctrl R, and when you see a yellow line in the center over here, that's where we want to add a loop. You can also use the mouse wheel, and if you scroll up, it will add multiple edge loops over there. So you don't want to add 1,000 of them because we don't need that many. But if we go to 3 like this, it'll add 3 sets of loops around here. And if I press the left mouse button, it adds them to the mesh. But you'll see that it's still selected. So if I drag the mouse, it'll now slide these loops up this object. So this is just a quick way to add geometry. And then if I just left click again, it'll fully apply that. And now those loops are set. Made a poll. Whoop. Nice. If you want me to slow down or anything, just let me know. But I'm going to keep going if everything is making sense. So I'm just going to press 1 to go into the side view again. And I'm going to zoom in over here. And so now we want to, okay. I will basically just go back, undo, and redo all these things. Okay, so unfortunately, the way I have Blender set up, I only have 20 undos or so I can't undo any further than that. But that's fine. I'll start from scratch. So I'm just going to create a new and not save. So anyone who's just joined in, basically what I've done is I've selected the default cube. I've gone into edit mode by pressing tab. I select faces, or as Zoltanic kindly pointed out, you can cycle to that by 3. And then you just select the top face. And if we grab it and press Z, so G and Z, you can move up a face vertically like this. You can also switch to the tools, so I can go to move, which is exactly what G does, except this is a more visual way of doing it. So that's grabbing along the blue for the Z, which goes up. And then with that face still selected, I press the E key to extrude. So that pulls out that face. And then, so that creates whole new geometry, because you see we've got another edge, the original edge sitting over there. And then if I select one of those faces that got created and I do an inset, so an eye, that will create a new face that's basically a shrunk down version of this. And when I move the mouse, you can just choose how shrunk down you want. If the keyboard shortcuts are confusing you, again, you can find these things over here. So if you hover over all of these, you can see that they will give you what they do. So if I click on extrude, you'll see that it gives me a little dragger that I can use to extrude this out. And then if I select the scale, I can just scale this vertically. So that's the same as pressing S and Z, but now you're just doing it with the mouse. And you can also scale it along the Y. So maybe this method is easier for some people to use. It's up to you. I definitely prefer shortcuts, but so I'm going to press E to extrude again. Scale it down along the Y, scale it along the Z. And then we've got our super basic X shape. So then, as I said, we're going to want to curve this guy out a little bit. So I press Control R for adding edge loops, where you'll see that there is a thing here called loop cut. So that's basically the same thing as pressing Control R. So this can add it anywhere, but you're just looking for the yellow line to add it through the middle of this. Okay, so that comes up if I select one of these tools on the left-hand side. So if I want to move, it creates a move tool with the selected objects. So then you can just drag by hand, selecting those things. So that works with rotation or scale. So depending on how you like to do things, that can make more sense. Especially also like if you're rotating around a scene and you've forgotten which way is X, Y, and Z, it can be useful to just manually do that without having to press S and go X, Y, Z to find the one that works. Okay, since we should have sort of an axe by now, I'm just going to go into how saving works in Blender, because you might get frustrated if you have to leave now and you need to go back and you don't want to go back and do it all over again, though it might make things easier to repeat things. But I'm just going to go to File, Save As, and you can choose where you're going to save it. I've got a folder for this Basics with Blender under Argonath, and I'm just going to call it Stream 1. So it's going to create a file for Blender with whatever name you select. And, oh wait, I'm going to have to switch to this view. So let me just go back. So File, Save As. So when external windows pop up, my screen capture thing doesn't like it. So now you can just see the chat while I'm doing this. And then you can just give it a name. So I'm calling it Stream 1. You can call it Axe or whatever you want. So it creates a .blend file and you save as, and you'll have your thing. There are also autosaves. So once you have a file saved, then it will create autosaves in the same folder that you saved it as. So if I go to Edit Preferences, under Save and Load, there are settings for autosave and how often to autosave and stuff like that. You can see it's set to 2 minutes for mine. Useful in case things crash. And usually when I'm doing stuff and I just don't want to mess up my old save file, I go to Save As and I just press the plus key on my keyboard, and you'll see that it just increments the name of the file. So now it's called Stream 2 instead of Stream 1, which is useful depending on what you're doing. Okay, so let's do the rounding out of this. Make sure you're in edit mode. I'm going to add that edge loop, and remember you do the mouse wheel scroll, and that'll add Stream Final number 3. I totally save things like that. And then they start getting called W2EF. Figure this freaking out. What's... Depending on how bad things are going. So now I'm just applying these added loops. And now to round off this axe blade, we can just go into the vertex select. And I'm just going to press the A key. So A, that selects everything. And if I press the A key twice fast, that deselects everything. You can also find this by just going select all or select none. So you see Alt A does the same thing, but it's easier for me to just press AA. So just make sure you've got nothing else selected. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rotate around, and we just want to grab the 2 points over here. So I'm going to select the one and press Shift and select the other. You could also select the edge, so you can go into Edge Select and just select that edge. It basically does the same thing. If I switch to the vertex mode, it's just selecting those 2 vertices. So we want to get this to make a nice round curve over here. And to do that manually is a little bit annoying. So I'm going to switch into the side view. So I'm going to press 1 on my numpad. Again, if you don't have a numpad, let me show you a setting. So if I go to Preferences and I think it's Navigation, no, Input. So if you don't have a numpad on, say, your laptop or something, you can go to Input and say Emulate Numpad, and that will turn the 1 to 0 keys on the top of your keyboard into the numpad keys. So when I say press 1, it's just the numbers at the top there. So 1 switches you to the side view, and then if I press G to grab this, it just stretches out this one little thing. So when I was in the what's called the loop cut thing, that's the Control R. I used the mouse wheel. So let me just undo. So I went Control R, and then when you see the yellow line appear in the center there, and if you scroll your mouse wheel up, if you don't have a mouse wheel, if you're on like a trackpad or something, I think it would be the... actually, I'm not sure. Then you can just use the... I think if you go into the loop cut thing over here, it should give you a little pop-up thing, and then you can say add multiple numbers of cuts over here. So there's multiple ways to do this in Blender. So you can say you want to add 100 different cuts or whatever. We just want to get 3 cuts over here. Okay, so we want to select this edge over here. Yeah, pressing things multiple times also works. And like, don't worry to mess around, you're not going to break anything. Blender's got tons of crap, but it's not going to destroy your computer. Probably. Don't blame me if it does. It's not gonna, don't worry. So I'm going to switch into the side view. So when I press G to grab it, it still looks sharp and ugly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on this, which is called proportional editing. So you see it's got a shortcut of O. So if you press O, or if you click on that, it's a little circle with circles on it, around it, in the center of the screen. And basically what proportional mode is, means if you have something selected, and if I press G now, it's going to select things in a region around it. And you'll see a little circle around where I've selected. And if I do the mouse wheel and scroll that up, it's basically saying this is the area that I want to have this affected. So this way we can scale it so it just affects the edges around here. And if we press the, what was it, I think X to go along the side, you can proportionally just move across this whole thing over here. Though it looks kind of sharp, it's not making a round edge. You'll see that next to this proportional editing thing, there's a sort of a curvy shape or something. And this is where you get the options for this proportional editing. So you see the shape that we kind of want is using a sphere, because that's a nice sort of round blade edge or something like that. You can make yours look like anything you want. I'm just making mine look like this to explain different ways of doing things. If you like it looking sharp, make it sharp. I don't care. So if I press G now and X to go along the X side, you'll see it creates this nice round edge of an axe. And if you're wondering why axes are round like this, so that you have less surface area, so that more pressure when you're slicing into someone. Science, yo. Okay, so you'll see we have this axe, but it's got like a really sharp edge. I mean, not sharp edge, blunt edge. We are making a gigantic sculpture, so I don't think it would have a super sharp edge, because it's made out of stone, and stone doesn't work like that. But if you were wanting to make a super sharp blade of some sort, you wouldn't want to have a face on this edge over here. So what you could do, we don't have to do this, I'm just explaining it to you now. You can just select an edge, and you can say, if you press the space bar, you can say merge, and you can say you can collapse it, and that will make the edge just into a single point. So splitting an edge into two is sort of the opposite of that, but you can just select your edge that you want. There are multiple different ways to do this, but the simplest would be to select your edge, and I think it's, I'm not sure what the keyboard shortcut is, but if there's anything that you want to do and you don't know what the keyboard shortcut is, just press spacebar and type in what you want to do. So I want to subdivide. So subdividing means you want to take that and cut it into multiple bits. So if I do subdivide, you'll see I've got this white edge and the orange edge. So it's splitting it into with one cut, or you can split it by 100 cuts or whatever. Oh yeah, that did change. You're right. Let me just double check. I'm not sure what the default is anymore. Just give me a second. Do you know, Glenn, what the default is? Yeah, you can change it in preferences. I just want to be sure what the... Just give me a second. I'm just trying to find the default. Okay, so it's F3 by default. So I like it to have it on space, but by default it is F3. So wait, what have I done? I have destroyed my keyboard shortcut. Give me a second. Okay. So that will give you this menu, and that will give you the option to search for absolutely any feature that is available for the thing that you have selected. So you're asking how to cut an edge into different pieces, so that would be subdivide. But there's also other things that you can do, like knife. but we'll get into that a little bit later. So we're just going to have a blunt looking axe because we're making a gigantic sculpture, so we don't need to go too crazy into it. And usually an axe will have something to offset it on the other side. So I'm just going to select those faces on the edge here. You can also press the C key, so C for circle, because it's called circle select, and that just lets you paint a selection. So you don't have to go click, shift, click, shift, click, shift, click. You can just go C, click and drag. And again, with the mouse wheel, you can scale this up and down to select more, or shift click to deselect and select less. So that's a nice way to just quickly select. So I'm going to go C, shrink down, click and select, right click to stop a circle select. So right click always cancels current tool. So I'm just going to inset this like we did on the other side. I'm not being too perfectionist, but I'm just going to shrink it down, turn off proportional, so it's about the same size as the other edge, and extrude that backwards. If you want to go crazy, you can go and make a double-headed axe if you want. I'm just going to make a simple axe like this. I might actually shrink this down a little bit. Whatever, it looks like an axe, but it's very chunky and stuff. That's actually a good question. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to add a new cube. Don't worry about this. I'm just starting from scratch. So if anyone just wants to start all over again. Okay, so actually, if you want to do mirrored stuff, if you want to make a double-headed axe without having to do it twice, you'll see that there is at the top right-hand side here a little butterfly shape icon with X, Y, and Z next to it. So if you look at the view over here, the red line is the line that follows where we would want to mirror it. So red is X. So if I turn on X and inset, well, actually it doesn't work for things like that. So you would have to select both and inset, and then you can extrude. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to like working like this. This is not how I intended to build this model, so there's a whole other way to do it, but you can also just select the two and go extrude and move along normals. No, individual normals. So I'm just pressing space and going extrude along individual normals. And now when I do this, it scales out along like that. If you're using the extrude tool thing, it doesn't actually give you that option. Great. If I go like this, nope. Okay, so you have to do the extrude and move on individual normals, and then you can do that again. Scale. So this is where the mirror thing will work. So if I select this edge now and scale it along the X, it'll work even though the other one is not selected because it's the same geometry on this side. So it doesn't really work when you add geometry, but it works for changing shape of geometry. So if I now do the adding edge loops and select this one, turn on proportional, grab that, move it along the X. Now you get a really easy double-sided axe without having to do it twice. And then you can just also select these, scale that along the Y, thin it out, and now it does it the same. And I'm only working on the one side. I actually quite like the look of the double-headed axe. Which do you prefer, single or double? I'll continue working with whichever one you prefer. How do you collapse a face? So select a face, and you can just say, I think, press space and say merge, and say collapse, and that'll shrink it. I think you can also, there's probably, I think, if you press M, that does the same, that's merge, and you can give merge at center, merge at cursor, or collapse. So there are tons of different shortcuts. Double X, cool. Okay, goodbye original X. Now we're working with this one. Okay, so but it's a super chunky square X. So what we're going to do is make it smoother and nicer. So there are probably like 100 different ways you can do this. But I'll probably show you a couple of different methods. So if you do remember, the end product with this is a giant sculpture, so we're not going for super organic stuff. But if you were, you'll see that on the right-hand side here, there is a little spanner-shaped icon, and that's for modifiers. So a modifier, make sure that you're back in object mode. Remember, you can press Tab key to switch between object and edit mode. Switch to object mode. Make sure you have your X or pole or whatever you have. Don't worry if you're behind. And then you can, if you go to the spanner thing and say add modifier, there are tons of different things over here. So we're going to look at 2 of these. But we're probably not going to use these in the final thing. But the simplest one is called subdivision surface. So if I turn that on, you'll see that the whole thing sort of smooths out and it becomes like interesting and stuff. So basically it smooths the whole object and adds new geometry, and by subdividing all the different faces. So if you have one face, it'll become 4 faces. So imagine if you take like a piece of cake, and you cut it in half, you get 2 pieces. If you cut it in quarters, you get quarters. So this is basically subdividing the mesh. So you'll see though, if I go back to edit mode, you're still working with the same stuff you had before, but the actual shape is being modified. That's why it's called the modifier. So this is a nice way, so you don't have to go and make a crazy complicated shape. You just create a simple shape and it adds geometry for you. So you just need to make sure you have your X selected. Make sure you're in object mode. You can do that by going Tab key, or just making sure that you click over here and saying object mode. If you go to the spanner thing over here, if you can't see that, just hover over and see where it says modifiers, modify properties, and you say add modifier, and you can say add modifier under generate subdivision surface. You can also just press S. No? Oh, used to be S. Never mind. Ignore that. So just click on subdivision surface, and then that'll do this thing which smooths out the whole mesh. You'll see that it's still got like sharp, flat looking bits. Select some faces and want to move them without extruding, but rather extending the attached faces. So basically that's select and press G will grab and move them. So then we just turn off proportional. So it's the same thing as we did to stretch out the top, just pressing G to grab it and move it out. Or if you go and just select the move tool over here, it's that. I think that's what you were asking. Yeah, so with this modifier now, there's different settings you can do it. Okay, yeah. Just make sure things are selected. Otherwise, it's going to be funny. Also, another thing to make sure of in Blender is that you don't have faces that you don't want selected and don't know. So say you're working in one section and then you start going to another section and you're like, well, I want to extrude this, and then you come up and suddenly you've got funny stuff happening at the top. So maybe if you're not sure if you have stuff selected, either just double A or go select none, or Alt A or whatever to select none. You can also do the opposite and just select all if you want to grab absolutely every single thing at once. So, as I said, the subdivision thing has settings, so you can go make it super detailed, so you can go like 3 subdivisions. And you'll see that there's a setting for render and viewport. At the moment, we're just working with viewport, so don't have to worry about render, but render is when you come to a final image, how detailed it is. So you can make it faster in the editor by just making it less here, but then you can make the render version higher. So this way things are just faster while you're working, but the rendered version will be the high quality one. Delete a face, vertex, or edge. So if you have it selected, you can just press X and it'll come up with a menu for what you want to delete. So since I have a face selected and I press delete, I can delete the whole face. So that'll punch a hole in the mesh. But if you say vertices, it'll cut out the vertices as well, which will cut out a lot more than it looks like it was going to do. So if I just take away the subdivision thing over here, you'll see that this axis is now missing a lot more. So just be selective when you're saying delete. You can also press the delete key, which will prop up the same thing. So X or delete will do the same thing. So this is also useful, like if you want to delete an entire selection. So you see, like you can delete an entire edge loop. So it'll delete all the edge loops around that face, which can be pretty useful. Okay, so I showed you subdivision, which kind of looks pretty cool actually on this. Though the problem is you see that it makes this edge over here rounded, and we don't want a rounded axe, but you can get axes that are rounded like that as well, but that's not what we're going for. How do you fill in a loop? What exactly do you mean by that? Like, have you deleted a loop and then you want to fill that in with faces or something like that? So say you've accidentally deleted something. So let's say you've deleted a face. You can go into edit mode, select either the edges or the vertices. So you'll see now I've got all those selected, and if you press the F key, it'll fill in that. So F for fill or F for face, depending on how you imagine it. Though it might make funny looking stuff depending on, like if you've got an enormous area, it will just fill it in with one gigantic polygon, which won't join up seamlessly. But since this was just one face, it basically just replaced exactly what it was. But you can always undo. I'm going to change my settings so I have more undos, actually. Where is that? Because you wanted to learn how to do it. Fair enough. So I'm just checking my undoing, and I'm turning mine up a little bit. It's in the settings under system. I'm giving myself 48 undos just because why not? Sometimes I want to undo a lot. Oh, and a useful thing is if you have a sequence of events that you want to undo and you don't want to press undo 25 times, you can go edit, undo history. So instead of just undo, there's undo history, and that'll give you a whole list of all the things that you can undo over here. Okay, but the methods I want to show you for smoothing out this blade, we don't want to round off all the sharp corners that we want sharp, but we do want like some nice round things. So like we want maybe the shaft of the axe to be nice and round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the edges that go around the shaft, and I can press Alt to select Alt and then click, and then if you're holding Shift to add more to the selection, and then just shift click just to get individuals like that. So I'm just going for the external edges around this shaft, so the sides and the top and bottom, so not on the interior or anything like that, if that makes sense. So let me just deselect all and show you again. So I'm just saying select none. So I'm selecting shift click, shift click, shift click. So that selects the entire top. If I go shift and alt click, it'll select that entire loop around the side there. But I don't actually want this edge, so I can just shift click on it again to deselect it. And then I'm just shift clicking on these sides and the bottom. There are other ways to select things, but this one's fairly straightforward. You're just selecting exactly what you want. So we're working with edges now, not faces, remember. So when you have those selected, you can go Control B. So Control B for bevel. So you'll see now when I drag the mouse, it creates a bevel. So bevel is basically a smoothed edge. So because of the way this mesh was created, it's making some weird things happen over here. So I might actually just want to check out what's going over here. Okay, so I messed up some stuff at some point by probably insetting or beveling multiple times accidentally. You'll see that there's actually multiple faces over here. So I kind of screwed up at some point. But since we know that we're working with a almost 30-meter axe over here, we can do something to fix that up. So I'm just going to press A and select all. So all the vertices in the mesh are selected. I'm then going to say merge by distance. So I'm just going to, that means any vertex that's too close will merge. So I want to say any vertex that's dragging this, you can see when things start to go wrong. So 0.1 meter will merge together. Don't worry if this isn't making sense, it's just because I made a mistake. And now if I do that beveling, just selecting again, that is why it selected that funny edge, which makes sense. So you can get frustrating things like that where you accidentally do something, especially when you're repeating things over like this. Okay, so with those edges selected, I'm going to do Control B, and that looks a lot nicer now. So beveling just smooths out the edges. So if you want to select a long section of edges, just do Alt and then click on the edge. So that will select connected things. So that basically selects an edge loop. So if I do Alt, click, remember we added edge loops, so that will select these entire loops over here. So I can select multiple by going Alt and Shift click to select multiple groups. So that selects that entire loop. So I'm doing Alt click will select that entire loop. Alt Shift click will select that other loop. and then just shift click for the top and sides and bottom. Well, I'm saying shift click because if you don't do shift click, you're going to just deselect what you had and only select the one. So like most of these tools, when I do Control B for bevel, if I use the mouse wheel and scroll up, you get a option to add a number of additional edges into this. So make yours as cubular or tubular as you want. Cubular, that's not a word, but whatever. Don't go more than like 5 loops or something, because otherwise you're just getting needlessly complicated. I'm going to keep mine slightly square because I'm working on a giant sculpture, so I'm imagining these are like blocks of stone. So we've just rounded off those edges a little bit, so now it's not these sharp things. And you kind of want to do this when you're modeling with almost everything, because if you look at an object around you, barely anything has a perfectly sharp edge. So like, look at your keys. They've got rounded edges even on the sharp points. If you look at a glass, it's not sharp on the edges, it's rounded around the edges. If you look at your keyboard or your mouse, even in the sharp things, they're not like 90 degrees, they round out on the edges. So it makes things look more natural. Is this making sense? If you are having issues and you don't know how to explain it, you can always drop off things in the Discord channel, the Basics with Blender channel. Let me actually pop in that link again because it's been a while. Oh, by the way, there is a giveaway going on the channel. I'm just taking a quick break while people catch up. There's a giveaway going on for Prison Architect. When I get to 50 followers, I'll give away Prison Architect to the person who wins the draw. You just need to enter it by going !enter or !ticket in chat. And you just need to be a follower because then you'll get 100 points. You also get points for viewing and you can enter multiple different times. Prison Architect recently came out with a new DLC for island prisons, so you can do like Alcatraz and stuff like that, if that's your thing. Alright. I also do have a Patron, and I have a Discord channel, I have a YouTube channel. This will become a tutorial on YouTube if you're interested. Make it rain! Boom! Okay, so any questions? Enter. Speak friend and enter. Melon. Always funny there's melon. Oh yeah, I did promise that I'd give a random trivia. But we've been very focused on just a basic axe for now. I think we'll get onto trivia and stuff later on. But here's an interesting fact. In the movie, they don't have axes. They've got swords, which is incorrect. I made the edges round with bevel. So if I go Control Z, with the edges selected, I go Control B for bevel. If you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, there is a, where is it? Bevel. So you can find it over here, bevel, and then you'll see that it will give you this little dragger, and you can drag that. And then you get all these different settings, so you can say you want 4 cuts or whatever. That's the same as doing the mouse wheel thing. Okay, so selecting all those edges was the tedious process of just selecting the one, shift clicking another, shift left clicking, shift left clicking, shift. And then for these top ones, I can go Shift and then Alt click, and that selects the loop. Shift and Alt click to select that loop, and Shift click to get the top. There are other things you can do. So you could also be like, well, let's just select faces and go press C to select just these faces. And then I've got to go C and Shift click to deselect those ones. It's a little bit less precise, but it might be quicker depending on what you're doing. And that will basically do the same, though the only thing is if I go into edge mode, you'll see that I've now got these ones selected as well, and I don't really want to bevel that, so it was kind of easier to just select the individual edges. But as you can see, there's multiple different ways, and I don't want those ones selected either, because if I did have them selected, it would bevel those edges as well. So just lots of shift left click, select all the different things. You can also go C and click and drag to select by painting a circle. Depends on your preference. I don't mind individually selecting things. If you've got nice edge loops and you just do Alt click, you can select a nice edge loop. That's kind of why it's sometimes nice to create a mesh with nice loops like this. It makes things easier to work with. But we're not worrying too much on doing things perfectly or properly. We just want to make stuff. So I'm going to go Control B for bevel, add these edges, and you can see it basically makes a perfectly round thing if you go all the way. If you go too far, it goes absolutely crazy. So just be gentle with your mouse. And another thing, in Blender, whenever you're doing something, and if you're finding it's going too fast, moving too far or something, if you hold down Shift, it goes into, I don't know, slow mode. I don't know what it's called, but it makes, call it precision mode rather. So you can go be more precise and make it specifically. So that'll work with scale, rotation, or anything. So you'll see now when I do that bevel, it's just applying that bevel onto the areas that I had selected. If I had had these other ones selected as well, it would have beveled in the middle over here. So if I go back and select these like this and go Control B, you see we get this little bit of a mess of stuff going on here. And that kind of just makes it more difficult to do stuff later. So you just want to make sure you have only the things that you want to work with selected. So I'm just going to bevel it until it gets just before that joint with the blade. And then you get this slightly smoothed out shaft. But if you zoom in, you'll see that it still looks like flat, like polished edges. So that's because it's in flat shading mode. So you just need to select your object, right click, and say shade smooth. So you'll see that completely changes how it looks. So before we were in flat shade, so I just Control Z to undo. But that's the same as saying shade flat, shade smooth. So you'll see some things are looking a bit weird, but these bevel edges are looking nice. So the reason why these edges are looking a bit weird over here is because basically it's making it round around the whole blade, and we kind of don't want that, but we'll fix that a little bit just now. So what I want to do, I just want to round out some of these other edges around here. So I'm going to round out the other sides, so the top and bottom of the blade. I don't want to do the edge at the moment, just the top and bottom. It depends. So we might want to add other details later on. But if you started dissolving some of these edges over here, you might find that it changes too much of the geometry and things start looking weird. I'd say don't go for premature optimization. Basically, like a coder, if it looks all right for now, don't worry about it. Maybe best practice would be to not have these extra things over here, but let's not get too complicated. So I'm just going to deselect some of these things. You see we've got these little straggler edges over here. We don't want those selected because they're attached to the shaft. Yeah, it is a chore, but you get used to it. As I said, there are other ways to select things, but I'm just showing the simple methods for now. So with these selected, I can do the same thing and go Control B. Hello, welcome back. So this doesn't need to be a super smooth edge because it is part of the blade. So I'm just beveling it with like 2. No, let's go for 1. 2? Yeah, let's do 2. So if I now go back into object mode, those edges look a little bit nicer. So what we're doing today is basics with Blender. So we're going all the way from scratch to create stuff in Blender. And what we're working on is an axe, as you can probably see. And eventually, over a few streams, we're going to go ahead and create the Argonath, which is the 2 massive statues in The Lord of the Rings. If you've seen it or read it, when they're going down the river Anduin after visiting Galadriel, there are these 2 giant statues. So they're really awesome, and they both wield axes. So that's what we're working on here. Just for you stragglers joining in. So you'll see how that starts making it look more natural to have these rounded edges over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select these loops over here. So the ones between the flat and the round section of the blade. And I'm going to also add a bevel over here. So this way you can add as much roundness as you want, or you can just make it long and flat, just using the mouse wheel to add additional segments, or not, depending on what you want. I'm going to go with not too many. But this way we get a nice smooth switch between the thick and the thin areas of the blade. So you might, when you're doing these bevels, get funny things going on over here. So see, like these small areas, it starts to get a little bit of issues. So I can go and undo the beveling, and if I go into the actual bevel tool thing over here and bevel this is where you get all these different settings. And what you can do is fiddle around with how this fits in by doing stuff like I think clamp the overlap. So you see here, do not allow beveled edges to overlap. So now it should help with some of these things. Let me just do that again. No, not helping a lot. You might have to manually do these things. So that is the problem where you get these bevels and stuff in small places. No, it did help a little bit. There is a little bit of an overlap there. So to fix that, we can do what we did earlier with the merge by distance. And we just want to make it a little bit smaller because now we do have some smaller things on this mesh. So just use this and drag this slider a little bit visually so you don't get funny things changing like that, but just the areas that you want. And that'll fix up a lot of the weird little geometry stuff. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Your mesh doesn't have to be perfect. We're making art, we're not making game characters or stuff like that. So the last thing is you'll see that when I rotate around, if you remember with the middle mouse key, you'll see that the lighting on the edge is still a bit weird. It looks like rounder than it is. It's supposed to be flat. So I can add another modifier here called weighted normal. So what it does, when I click on this, it will add a way to recalculate normals. Nothing has changed because you have to have another feature enabled. Hey, thanks for following the Finnish Wizard. That's a cool name. Too bad at the point in the story that we're getting this from, Gandalf was already dead. Spoilers, but he wasn't dead. So we're creating the Argonath, so the statues in the Lord of the Rings, if you don't get my reference. So we have to enable the auto smooth. You'll see it says here, enable auto smooth in object data properties. So that's just this little thing over here, object data properties. So that's the orange little triangle with little squares on the edges. And you'll see that there is a thing for normals. Just turn on auto smooth. So that starts to help make the edges look a little bit more natural. There's not a lot of geometry there, so you can see you get a little bit of funny stuff going on, but that will be fixed when we go and grab some edges and we can bevel the edge of our blade. So depending on, like if you were making a super sharp blade, maybe you would not want to do this. I'm just deselecting some of these other edges that came up here. So I'm pressing B for border select, and I'm dragging over an area because I just want to select that edge over there, and it's hard to select. And if I hold in Shift, it'll deselect that edge. So this is another way, like you can select edges. I usually find it easier for deselecting edges for some reason, but maybe if you've got very precise rectangle selections, you could have done this for selecting edges, but I find it easier for deselecting. So now we've got the two edges of our blade. If you've got a single bladed axe, you just need the one. And again, we're going to go Control B. And you see we get some funny stuff happening over here. So that's because it's creating bevels on those really small areas. So let's undo that. Go into the bevel, create a bevel, but wait for the tools to come up and turn on the clamp overlap thing. You see it's sort of, I must have some edges selected still over there. Is that the case? Yeah, that's why. So then we just go into vertex mode. I had a couple of things that were too small to see still selected. That's why it was going funny. So you can get weird things like that happening when you've got things selected that you didn't know were selected. So it is often useful to just press G, and when you're just checking your selection, to grab and shift around, and you'll see that I've got a random little vertex selected over there. So I'm just going B, shift, deselect, make sure it's gone. And that should just be those edges. So now if I go Control B for bevel, yeah, we get less weirdness. Though it does have some weirdness still because those tips are not beveling nicely. But that's fine. We don't need to have it perfect. I'm just messing with the middle mouse button to get a nice amount of loops on here. So we get these funny little thingies sticking out over here. So I'm just going to select these vertices and just going to scale them down. So it's added a couple of funny ones like that. You might notice that sometimes when you're selecting things that are behind other things, you can't actually select them. Like there's these vertices that are not being selected. Yeah, the nice thing about beveling is it's only in a defined area and it's not adding more than you need to. It's only going along the edge that you're selecting. So I'm just going to turn on X-ray. So what it's doing now is not letting me select things at the back. So if I go B to select, it's only selecting at the front. So that's preventing you from selecting back faces, object in the back. So if I'm turning on X-ray, so you'll see that at the top here, it says toggle X-ray. It says the keyboard shortcut is Alt-Z. Yours might be a bit different. Then you can now select through things. This little bevel thing is being a little bit annoying because I am making this a rather beveled object, which maybe we didn't need to do. So it is causing a little bit of trouble. But fixing errors is a nice way to learn problems. You'll see when X-ray is on, you see through things. I'm just going to turn that off. But you'll see how that solved the funny lighting around the object. If beveling is causing you too much trouble and you're not enjoying it, don't do it like this. We can do it another way. So what I'm going to do, actually, just let me save this quickly so I can open up my old version. Stream 1 Axe Bevel. So I'm just going to say open recent and go to the, well, okay, this is a single barrel bladed axe, doesn't matter. If beveling is causing you too much trouble doing it manually like that, you can just do a modifier. So there is a bevel modifier, which basically does this, but it does it on the entire object. You can choose how many segments you want. So do somewhere between 2 and 5, depending on how detailed you want to be. I'll go with 5. Offset is how far it goes. So you'll see when I zoom in, it's changing the size. And there are a bunch of different options. These are the same ones that you saw earlier. But you can then do stuff like, if you just hover over, you see exactly what these different things, but offset is what it's on now. It's how far it is offset from the original. You can do it by width. You'll see the corner change there. Depth looks a bit weird. Percent is just the percent between the two different things, two different edges. So you can just mess around with these to find what works. But what's really useful is you can just say limit it by angle and other things here that we can look at later, but we're not going to do that now. So if you do limit by angle, you can tell that you only want to bevel edges that have an angle that is 30 degrees, or maybe you want to do it 90 degrees. So it'll only bevel 90 degrees edges and stuff like that. So you can selectively bevel different edges based on that. So this way you don't have to manually go and do it. The problem is it's basically doing it over the entire mesh, and maybe you don't want to bevel absolutely everything. But it's a nice, simple way to do it. You might still get weird things, and you can't directly edit this because it's working as a modifier. It does, but it also adds them that you can't edit them directly. You have to apply the modifier to edit them. So if you go into edit mode now, you'll see that it's still the same faces and stuff back here without bevels, but it adds it on top. It could be, like, I think this is many people's first attempt at Blender, so don't feel bad if it's not going amazingly. Remember, this is going to go up on YouTube soon, so if you are struggling or if things are going weird, you can start from scratch from the video that'll be on YouTube, or you can just watch the VODs here on Twitch. I think those are up for 2 weeks, so you can follow through to my undead. What? But beveling, you don't want to go absolutely crazy. Yeah. No, well, these are perfectly normal, common problems. Like, that's why I'm starting with an axe, which is fairly simple. What often can be useful, like, this isn't a enormous object. You can start from scratch, and since you now kind of know how to do it, you can start from scratch without the mistakes, and it might go quicker. Like, I know that sounds annoying, but like, doing a thing over and over is like the best way to learn. Like, that's why this is more like useful than just watching a video, but like working along with it helps you learn, because practice. And I'm not saying you're dumb, I'm just saying like, these things are very easy mistakes to make. You can see I've already made mistakes in this doing stuff, so don't worry about it. But bevels are nice, they make things look good. But as I said, yeah, if just beveling individual things is weird, just do the bevel modifier and bevel the whole thing. It's the make stuff look good button. And don't forget to switch it on to smooth shading to get the nice smooth shading edge. Aw, bevel loves you though.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. Is there any particular stuff that didn't make sense that you want me to go over again? Like extruding, insetting, beveling, selecting. I'm happy to go over the stuff again. Figure it out. Oh, I just popped into the Discord channel, and we've got a pretty awesome little axe over here. Nice. I think it looks cool. Well done. Where's my thing?
Doing terrific.
The enthusiastic voice. Doing terrific.
Wow.
Wow. Do you want me to move on? You can indeed. So if I go into edit mode and select a face, so there are several different ways you can do it. but probably the easiest is with a knife. So if you press K for knife tool, you'll see you get a little green dot that follows your mouse around. Mouse. And then if you click on an edge, that'll be the start point, and you can go somewhere else and click again, and then you can do that multiple different times. Bevel. And then if you press enter, that'll slice that face up into bevel. So that's probably the easiest way to do it, because then you can control how it goes. And then if you hold in the control key while you're doing the knife tool, it'll snap it to the center of an edge. So you can be just more specific about where you do it. So you can go control click, control click, control click, control click, and then it'll just go along the center of those edges. I think that's probably the easiest way. So yeah, knife tool is really nice for adding in little details. Just press K. K. Just make sure you're in edit mode. K, and then if you see the green dot, if you don't remember the keyboard shortcut, you'll see it over here. It's called knife. But just remember K for knife. Knife cuts, cutting faces. And it's nice, you can even add like whatever shape you want. You can even, go into the middle of a face as you want. You don't have to go onto an edge. So you can do this to make like a cool shape to stretch out of your object. I mean, it doesn't always create perfect faces, but stuff like that. Bevel. What didn't it play? I heard it though. That's what she said. I heard it. How about I just play it for you again?
That's what she said. Embarrassing!
That one was for you. You don't have to do the bevel. Like, if it's annoying you, don't do it. We're just going to create happy little X's. This is supposed to be fun, guys. Bob Ross reference. Yeah. But bevels are nice. Like, what if you don't like how sharp this is? You can just go bevel. Boom. What was that? Bevel. Did you say you don't like bevels? Bevel. Okay, that's too much bevel. It's okay. Undo. Okay, so I don't think we're going to do much more than make a nice little axe today. So let's just make it look interesting. No, I don't think so. Like, maybe we should add some bevels on our bevels. Like, let's add a bevel around here. Why not? I'm kidding. So, how can we make this look better? I did have a reference image. What was my original design like? So this is kind of how my axe was going to look. Maybe I was going to make it a little bit fatter in parts. So let me go into face select, and I just want to have more of a sort of a chisel shape along the edge here. So I'm just going to Alt-Shift-Select these loops. Let's have a look. That's a dwarven axe, I would say. It's got that that cool sort of dwarven Art Deco look to it, with some spikes on it. Nice. It will kill. Who else watches? What's this called? Forged in Fire. It will kill. But nice. I mean, it's definitely an axe, so good job. So I'm just gonna go into this guy, select these faces on the edge over here. Because on an axe, depending on how it's constructed, I'm imagining this one will be like a bound axe or something, so maybe it will be a bit thicker on the mounted section. I mean, you do get some where it would be just pressure fit or something like that. So I'm just going to scale this and go along the Y. So remember the Y scale, pressing X, Y, and Z will scale just along that. And I don't actually like it scaling along this section, so I'm just deselecting with the C circle select thing. Scale Y, so you see because I only selected the middle, it doesn't change that, so I might have to go and manually Alt-click to deselect these loops. Or just select from scratch. So the problem is with that, it's scaling up that little section there, not scaling up that little section, so let's just select this. You don't have to do any of this, I'm just trying to make mine look a little bit nicer. Oh, you guys are going to have so much fun when we're getting to doing the actual humans. So now let's turn on proportional, scale it with the Y, shrink it down a little bit. And I'm just going to do a little sequence of things like this. I don't want to make it enormously thick, I'm just being gentle and scaling it up. I'm just watching those edges so that they don't overlap. It's a minor thing, but you see it makes it just a little bit fatter looking. And then I think I'm actually going to take two of these in the middle, scale it up like that. I've got a little bit of mounting or something. Don't worry, yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. In fact, I quite like how some of yours are looking. Death axe. I mean, anything up until the bit where I started beveling, if you've got this basically without the bevel, you've got what we needed to do today. The bevel just makes it look slightly nicer. Remember, this is an axe that's going to be viewed from like that distance. in our final render. So if it's not perfect, don't worry about it. Any little details will get hidden and stuff. Select your object, right click, shade smooth. You can also, if anything you're not sure the way to get there, select the object you want to apply it on, or select the faces that you want to apply it on. Select a type, if you know what it's called, shade smooth or shade flat. I have auto smooth on, so it's going to look smooth all the time. Smooth mode kind of shows imperfections. Yeah, so this I think is actually going to be a two-handed axe. Let me show you what. So I made a quick and dirty little sketch of what it's going to look like. As you can see, it's a really quick and dirty thing. So this axe is like more than half the size of a man. So I think maybe we should make our handles longer. Again, yours doesn't have to look like mine. I'm just making it this way. So you might want to have just a hand axe that he's holding in one hand. Or maybe you want to make a gigantic axe that shoots above his head, anime style. It's up to you. So that's what mine will look like. And I will put this in the Discord next time for when we start doing person shape. But that'll come. We can go slowly. People are hard. So yeah, let's make it look a bit taller. So I'm going to go into face select mode. I don't need to have these selected. I just want to select all the things at the top. So what I can do is go into X-ray mode, press numpad 1 to go to the side view, double select A to select none, press B to do the border select, and that will just select all the objects, and you can get them on the back as well. If you don't have X-ray mode on, you'll get just one side. So make sure you have X-ray for this, or otherwise you'll have to go do it twice. And then you can just simply go G and Z to stretch it up. So I'm going to go, I don't know, about that tall. You can always change these things. That's what's nice about 3D stuff. If you need to change something, you can go back and change it. If you want to make a curved handle, Swedish lumberjack knight, nice. So like if you want to add some curves, maybe to make it more like a lumber axe, because I've got a nice little curve to them, you can go do the same stuff we did to add the edge loops. Do Control R and maybe add like, I don't know, 3 loops. Slide them around to wherever you want. And then you can grab a loop. You can go Alt click on a loop. And then you can move it around a little bit. I mean, now that just looks like a broken handle thing, because mine was not intended to be bent. But if you want a bent shaft or curved shaft or something, you can do that. What's cool is then if you have lots and lots of these different, what's it called, loops. You can turn on proportional editing, and if you have the scales set up big enough, you can just grab one and bend that where you want. So you can just make a nice smooth curve. Or if you use rotation tool, you can just rotate it around to get a nice curve in there, if that's something you want. I'm not going to use that, I'm just going to make it nice, straight and simple. Yeah, I'd say this is kind of an X now. Pretty simple, kind of blocky, but we are doing a sculpture, so blocky makes sense. And yeah, if you have any questions, pop them in the Discord. I will check up on that, and if you have questions, I'll answer them there. And yeah, I'm going to pop this onto YouTube as well. And then on Thursday, when we have the second one, I think we'll start with complex shapes, working with the character. Now, we could also just do simpler shapes as well. So, ooh, damn, Glenn. Dang, son. Ooh, what did I do? Didn't mean to do that. That is a nice looking axe. Nice. I like it. I like it a lot. I think some king wielding that would be pretty happy. Yeah, well, you don't need a billion bevels. Yeah, boy. So yeah, Thursday I'll let you decide. We can start making the character models, or we can do some more simple stuff and
Figure it out.
do something like the boats that the Fellowship went down the, the river in. So that might be probably a better way to start. Just make a boat shape and then go into people, just so we progress up a little bit. Awesome. I hope to see you again on Thursday. Yeah, so you can watch the VOD from the start once the stream is over, and if you missed out on any other stuff, and it will be on YouTube soon. And yeah, don't forget to save, unless you want to redo your axes again from scratch. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. See you on Thursday, and we'll start getting more complicated. And we're going to go into texturing and materials and rendering in the future, but just keeping with the models for now. And don't worry, no, you can do a lot of that stuff in Blender. Substance just makes it easier. You can probably do, I don't know, 80% of the stuff in Blender. It's got a lovely node material and texture stuff as well. Substance just has the bonus of having like 400 other nodes available. Just as I was doing something. Need to learn how to spell, Glenn. Let's do that raffle. Let's see who's winning. I always do it too soon.
That's what she said.
Tech Dream, you won. But it's okay, you're all winners because you joined in. So you'll get 50 points. If you want to enter the giveaway, don't forget you can enter with !enter or !ticket. You just need to be a follower to have points, or you just need to have watched a couple hours. And you can enter as many times as you want. Alrighty, I'll see you on Thursday. Thanks for joining in. Goodbye.